Hi everyone, my name is Sue, and today we are talking.
Like, are we doing?
Today we are going to have an animated discussion about the 1921 film, The Phantom Carriage. Why did I select this film? I scoured a lot of different lists, and something about an older film that is on many of the what is it? History of world cinema slash critically acclaimed films that are unknown, or lists like that all feature this, and this gets such a high rating that I said, let's give it a whirl. And plus it was on YouTube for free, and so I was like, even better, everyone has easy access to it, let's go. So really quickly, the synopsis is that the film is actually based on a book, and the premise of the book is that on the very last second of the very last hour of midnight on New Year's Eve, whoever dies at the very last second is then destined to basically be death's servant by driving around this phantom carriage name and collecting souls for death for one full year until the next New Year's Eve, when the next soul will then replace them. And so this story follows a man who, not spoiler, but dies right at the stroke of midnight, and he is then kind of forced to reconcile with his past and all the harm that he's done to various people as he's about to take over. And so it's very Ebenezer Scrooge-esque, going backwards in time and reliving all your past trespasses against other people and reconciling with them. So I'd love to hear your initial feedback.
Yeah, Morgan has feelings. I can see it.
My main feelings on this, I will say my main negative feelings. I do even have a list of positives, so I'm not completely salty. Is that it felt like a movie with an agenda. Clayton said, when you guys finished it, Clayton said that you just watched a 2-hour PSA from Dare, and I was like, I see it. I really see it.
It absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. It was like, and this is the one where I'm don't want to speak out of turn yet, so I think I'll leave it at that, and I want to hear what you guys actually have to say, and then I'll see how mean I can be.
So I was doing some reading today about the temperance movement of the 1800s, early 1900s, because it pretty much fizzled out as an influential societal movement in the mid 20th century after the end of Prohibition. So that was kind of interesting, and obviously this movie is heavily influenced by the temperance movement. The blaming of alcohol for a lot of societal ills, and treating alcoholics basically as the dregs of society, kind of. I mean, there's, again, I feel like there's context there that we don't really understand, but it's very clear, very obvious that there were a lot of things that we know now about alcoholism that were not known back then. Something that you could get past with the right amount of properly applied religion, which is what happens in this movie.
Yeah, I think it's there's so many pieces to me that, for example, I mean, that it's set in Sweden, and I make all of these barriers where I'm like, oh, well, in Sweden, what was going on in that time? And in 1920, do they even understand this concept of storytelling where you might switch from time to time? I think of them, everyone is so simple and like, oh my gosh, I bet when they saw the ghost on film, like they were freaking out. Like I think I oversimplify everyone from the 20s. I was like grasping for that context, like trying to understand what people would have thought during that time. Yeah, did people like it? Was this a blockbuster, or was it like a niche film that was just, you know, like promoting one agenda?
Just used in Salvation Army promotional material.
I first noticed when David Holm was coming back to his house after he was released from prison. And there was this scene where he's right at the door and he can't get in. And there's this long, drawn out like observation as he looks down, kicks over, and stares at the key that's still left there. And that whole thing was very, to me, very emotional. Like it held some kind of like captivity as you're like, what is he thinking? What is he, you know, because this is obviously his house. He knew to kick over that rug and whatever before he goes in. And that whole scene was so long that I was like, as in after that happened, I was thinking to myself, like, we take for granted those long pause effects in modern day films. And it's very dramatic in modern film. But in the past, it would be so much easier to just go, oh, tries the door, it's locked, kicks open the rug, takes the key, and instead it just lingers.
Do you feel like some of those longer or lingering shots had more impact in this movie than you would expect them to because it's a silent movie? Because there are not like sound effects and dialogue? And, do you feel like that played into some of the impact that the scenes had when you watch them?
Oh, I was trying to search for, I don't think I reflected on that specifically. It did feel, I don't know, I think I had some kind of modern impatience with some of the storytelling. And so that might have been more like when there was a slow moving scene. I can't think of times where it impacted me. I was more like, okay, what's happening next? So I can't add to that question.
I took it as very much like it was just a very necessary part of the storytelling, but that's also just like how it had to be back then. Like I haven't watched a ton of silent films, but I guess I've seen some. And I remember I was frustrated because I was trying to do other stuff as I was watching this film, but you can't. But you can't, because a lot of the emotional context is just given through literally just the actors on the screen. You don't get to hear the dialogue. You get the general kind of cue from the music, but sometimes that doesn't quite match up to like, you know, to what we consume modernly. And so you really have to pay attention to what is happening in the scenes in order to fully get the context and not to miss a text line, which I could.
To answer your question, Clayton, though, like I feel like normally when there's no dialogue or sound effects, I would be more impatient, and I would well, because there's not as many clues, so your senses are not like barraged or anything like that. So you're like, oh my God, what's happening? It's so slow. But I think so much of this film was subtle, including those long drawn out. And I've watched some films from around this time as well where all of the performances and the acting is like so over exaggerated. I mean, like, wow, or like, ooh, you know, and it's very annoyingly so that it's hard to watch those films. And that being said, though, I found the acting more relatable as like a more modern style of acting, where I could connect with them. Therefore, I felt more engaged actually than I would if I expected every pause or every silence to be interrupted with like, or some kind of like very exaggerated something musically or performance wise. And this one was just very subtle throughout. And those long pauses were like long ellipses in those moments as needed.
Yeah, and they were there for a reason, and they served a purpose and created an effect. It's interesting you say that about the acting, because that was something I put down in my notes pretty early on in the movie. It's like, this acting is surprisingly good. And then I was thinking about it, and it's like well, you think about it, it's a silent film. Like, so much of the story has to be communicated just through the acting. Like, it's like you're miming these things, because even the text cards in between aren't. I mean, they're just text. You know, they're very flat, and, two-dimensional. Just obviously they are. So they, you know, progress the story, but they don't progress the immersion, like the experience. That's entirely on the actors. And the acting in this movie was actually a very deliberate choice by the director, which I don't think we noted this, but the director is the main character. And it was his, like, it was his choice to have these understated, like, natural performances. Like, he had to work with his cast and be like, don't do it like theater actors, do it like this. Which I thought was just fascinating, because, you know, now 100 years later, it's like, that looks really good. And
what a progressive, like, vision.
Yeah, visionary, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you, minus the temperance propaganda, what did you guys think of this story?
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of the stuff that probably was revolutionary in its time obviously is not now. So it becomes a little hard to, I guess I'm a fan of how the story was told, not a huge fan
not
of
so much
the
of the
story. Yeah.
Rachel, what do you think?
I would say I liked the way the story developed. Like, I liked at the beginning making assumptions, like assuming that Edith you know, had this thing with David, and like watching for that to develop. Like, the information that's revealed to you and the multiple stories that are happening, I enjoyed that. I feel like I had more criticisms about, like, the kind of social, like the wife and the family, and they're really culturally different things that we could bring up next. But Sue, what did you?
So when I was watching this after your text, because I got like part of the way through and did not realize it would be so heavily accented on, like, your alcoholism led to these things, kind of whatever, you know, until after your text. And I don't know why, but for me, I saw it as kind of a commentary on just addiction. And because I think that you can apply, like, so much of the kind of negativity that surrounds his life because of the addiction. I mean, to any addiction. And so it made it feel, again, with the modern acting, with the kind of timeless music that didn't feel 100% dated, it seemed actually a lot more relevant today than I really expected, to be honest. It caught me by surprise.
Yeah, there was like a, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rach.
I guess the alcohol addiction didn't, I know that was a lesson, but I thought his, like, vengeful heart, like, he wanted revenge. I was just like, you're so, like, why do you have to ruin everything? But maybe that is kind of, like you were saying, Sue, a product of the addiction, like the way you're destroying all these things. But that, like, really bothered me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Clayton.
I was just going to say, I wonder if that kind of comes from the moralistic view on addiction, as addiction as a moral failure. Then the addict is, you know, completely self-absorbed, selfish. I don't know, that maybe David Holm was portrayed as such a bad guy because his addiction was being viewed through that lens.
But the portrayal of woman as like this, the moral, I don't know, morally responsible,
redemptive force.
Yes, that was a little fatiguing for me.
If I can inject my straight up just like modern opinions into this, I wish he hadn't had taken him back.
I definitely.
Well, I mean, in that same vein, then can we like really quickly compare, like in the 1920s, I bet that Edith's character was like the protagonist / like hero of this movie, while the wife is like this victim. But with our new eyes of watching this 100 years later, I will say I found Edith's behavior completely obnoxious. And I also felt like she was the only one who was like, whose acting was just so out of place and overly angelic and, oh, please bring David. I need him. It's so like gross. Meanwhile, like I found the wife who was supposed to be this victim, this tragic example of like, you know, the women that were abused during this time because of alcoholism and or all that. I honestly felt like she had way more agency to what you're getting at, Rachel. It's like the two women in this film that that are prominent in this film, I can imagine what their roles and their outcome in perception was in society back then. But it is really interesting to watch it now, 100 years later, and have our viewpoints of each of their actions with our lens from now, right? Our modern lens.
I did like that Edith like kind of owned up. She was just like, I ruined this woman's life by really suggesting, like pushing for her to take him back. And she's like, I gotta make amends. But also, I think like kind of beyond the moralistic with the storyline of the alcoholism and just like stepping back from that, I think that the interesting narrative too to this story is people being confronted with the consequences of their actions. I mean, the little brother who actually went to jail, the phantom driver who he's like, this is my fault, like I didn't realize it, this is my fault, but like I see it now. The husband eventually was just like, I'm changed now for real. kind of thing. And then Sister Edith too, and it's just that part I thought was interesting.
That was good and very consistent throughout the movie. Like, you know, really cool to see those parallels play out consistently throughout the movie. And I'd say that is as good a lesson as any to take from a movie like this. It's like, shit you do gonna come back on you.
But at the end, do you like David? Do you feel hopeful? Like, I don't know, the ending of the story, how did that sit with you guys?
I'll hop in. I know how like the filmmaker like intended you to take it. Like, he is absolutely redeemed, and they're probably fine in the narrative that this director set up. I realistically don't apply that. I don't know, I was neutral on it. I saw the intention. Did I find it believable? Not with the knowledge that I have these days.
I would agree with that. It's like in the story that we're being told, I 100% believe that David Holm has been reformed and is going to be
he's been saved.
Yeah, exactly. In real life, probably not so much. But you know, there's always hope, I guess.
Something about like I do think that he's redeemed, and like I know that my normal side of myself, my critical, cynical side, is like that. Like, the dude's back on the drink in like in 2 weeks. But I think what made him want to change is what's the reason why I want to believe that it'll stick, is that he was put back in his body and like ran to save his wife because she was going to off his children and her. And there's something very real and I think human about when you think that something that you have is never going to be taken away from you, you abuse it more. And it's like a belligerent kind of abuse if you're that way, because you're like, you're never going to fucking leave me. You're never going to leave. And his initial heartbreak when he came home from prison and then they were gone, that turned into rage. I think it was so much pain that turned into rage. Mm-hmm. and it manifested in drinking and this and that and whatever. So I think that the realization that she has it within herself to kill his children and herself, and then they will be removed from the earth for him to even terrorize if he wants to, I think that's a very real thing for him. That realization is enough to make him realize that, yeah, you can keep being an asshole, but at some point she's going to put a stop to it, whether you want to keep raging or not. So either you figure that out or she's going to kill herself and your children. It's just, there's only two ways this is going to go. And I think that realization was real at the end. So even in my cynical self, I think that human nature is that when you realize that something you've been taking for granted is definitively potentially going to be taken away from you, it's you proceed with caution, like once you've seen it with your own eyeballs that it really could be taken away from you. I think that people then take it more seriously. And I'd like to believe that it's at least another 25 years before the threat of that wanes enough for him to try again, But I was hopeful. I was surprisingly hopeful. I want to believe, David. I want to believe. So, okay, so the hardest question of all. How do we feel about ever potentially screening this under the banner of SHFF? Clayton gives it 2 thumbs up. Perfect.
I'd give it 3 if I could.
Put your toe up in there.
I'm just kidding.
There, man.
Grossed myself out.
I would not select this to screen at our film festival. I don't know if I would recommend that people watch it either. Unless it's somebody who's like just a hardcore film nerd who wants to like understand one of the foundational building blocks of Swedish film history. And it's not, I didn't dislike the movie. I'm glad that I watched it. It's just that I don't know why I would ever watch it again.
For me, it was so interesting to just have that experience, like to feel like you go back in time and the music and the different style of acting. And it feels like a film that I want to watch like in a class when I'm studying and I have more information. And then I just believe it has to be, if we wanted to go back to some an old film to learn about styles and filmmaking of the past, I feel like there would be a better example maybe of one instead of this. But it was interesting to me to experience the PSA part of it too, and kind of grapple with that, saving people, and it was so interesting. I'm glad I watched it, but I don't think it would, I'm torn. I don't think it would be the one I would pick.
I'm on a pretty similar train. Actually, I think if we like prepped almost like a history lesson kind of like class thing and like chose to do this movie, I think it would be really interesting to pick apart and show. I can't see it fitting into any of our current events. If we had like a SHFF oldies, I think that'd be pretty funny, and I would not be opposed.
Or even like film school,
Yeah.
type of thing.
But there's also like, there are probably more compelling movies from the era that we could choose.
Yeah, so I've seen a few silent films for some of my college courses, and I have to say this is one of the better silent films that I've seen. Though the PSA thing is very, very strong in this one versus like, you know, but like you guys are mentioning, I think that with historical background, if we were able to like even provide that briefly before subjecting somebody to this, like from going in blind, I think that this could be appreciated by a lot of people. Though would I choose to show it? Probably not at one of our events as established now, but it's definitely one that I would like to keep in the back of my mind, because I don't mind the PSA announcement as much as I value, I think, the filmmaking of it. But what this film does make me want to do is, having read about, so this is like on all those lists, because back in 1921, it started then affecting filmmaking on a lot of different levels. So, you know, the most notable one that I'm pretty sure all of us notice is, you know, the whole axing through the door, like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And that was like directly lifted from this movie. I mean, it was 100%. And I am curious now, I'm curious to see a list of all the different ways that film has been affected by this film, and then see if I can make that association. While, does that mean I want to like rewatch this again? No, but having watched it, I think now we can appreciate some of the references in later films. And so I'd be interested to do that as a personal thing, not a group effort. But so I think that that's a wrap for this week. Lot to say, given that it was very painful.
And I didn't feel excessively mean, so that was I reached my goal. Little mean, not excessive.
So next week